hospital.
Report as Pride and Dignity stop the New World Order. Welcome to Herpanwo TV. Well, I'm here in this lovely part of Oxford, actually. This is Meadow Lane in Oxford. And it's an absolutely beautiful place. I was lucky enough to live in this area. In fact, I used to live in that house right there. And I really loved living here. I was only here for a year, but it was nice. And you can see here, you got this woodland and there's the river over there. It's really lovely. You might remember that actually. I did some filming around here back then. But anyway, I'm heading for the city centre. I've just finished work. I'm heading for the city centre. I've got my yellow vest on. I'm not going through a Brexit protest. This is my work one. It doesn't have all the pen marks on it, you see. I've got one which I cover with slogans, you know, Brexit now, etc. And this one here, which I don't, because I wear it for work. Got my work boots on as well, you can see. So I just finished work, and that's why I've got this yellow vest on. Now, this is another roving film review that I'm doing today. But it's an unusual one. I'm actually going to a cinema I've not been to before, the Phoenix Cinema. I've not shown that one to you yet. But I'm also going to see a film that's actually not a new release. It's quite an old film, actually. It was first released in May of 1964. And the reason it's being shown now is because it's the 50th anniversary of its release. And I actually like the fact that cinemas do this, you know. I like the fact that they've discovered, in a sense, cinemas are wonderful things. I mean, they're just wonderful things. You know how much I love them. When the television was invented, everyone predicted that cinemas would die out. Because, well, you don't need them now, because you've got your own little box in the corner of your room. And it turned out that little box in the corner of the room, just sitting there on your own in your own home, could not replace the experience of being in the big screen in front of with all these other people in this huge auditorium and popcorn and things like that, and all the other things that go with cinema. So cinemas continue, and may they long continue. I hope they always do. But this is something that more and more picture houses are doing right now. They are not only showing new releases, they're actually re-showing classic movies. And I think that's an excellent idea. Because there's so many people who who want that experience of watching a classic movie on the big screen, which they never got the chance to do before. In my case, you know, I wasn't born then. There's lots of really old films that maybe before our time, or we missed first time round, that we'd like to see again. You know, the Star Wars trilogy's always been re-shown. In 2012 they showed a centenary special for the Titanic movie by James Cameron's Titanic, because it was the centenary of the sinking, and things like that. And I think that's an excellent idea. I hope they carry on showing these classic old movies. And the film I'm going to see is also one I have seen before, but I saw it a long time ago. I was only about 13 or 14. I was a teenager. I think maybe I was too young to appreciate it. And again, that's another reason that I'd like to be able to see, you know, have this experience again of seeing these things on the big screen. I should also point out actually that watching some films on the big screen is really, you know, the actual the sensation nature of it, the senses and things like that, the actual feel of it is actually much different. For example, I think I wrote an article about the film Arrival. I didn't do a video about it. I might include it in one of my disclosure videos. But the film Arrival is very good. It's an alien invasion movie, and of course alien invasion movies vary enormously in technical quality and intellectual content, and this scored highly on both axes. If you see Arrival, Denis Villeneuve's movie, do watch it. But some of the shots, you know, you cannot appreciate on the TV. These very vertiginous aerial shots of these alien spacecraft landing on Earth. You can't get that on TV. When I was in the cinema watching it was just incredible. It was like, you know, it's these aerial shots of these alien spacecraft. Absolutely amazing. Now, the film I'm going to see, if I get round to it eventually, the film I'm going to see is called Dr. Strangelove. And it's filmed by Stanley Kubrick. And it's actually got a subtitle. Its full title. It's got a subtitle. Its full title is Dr. Strangelove, or How I learned to stop worrying and love the bomb. And of course the subtitle is the writer, director, basically speaking. It's Kubrick himself speaking. And this is a black comedy. Now, I'll say more after that, because I don't remember much of it. As I said, I was pretty young at the time, but I told my dad I was going to go and see Dr. Strangelove, and he was like, "Oh, it's hilarious." And we know that Kubrick does have a sense. He does have a sense of humour. He has a very developed sense of humour. You see humour in all his films, actually, that I've watched of his. I watched most of them. You see elements of humour in them all, quite sophisticated humour. Now, this is rumoured to be the funniest. It's meant to be a black comedy. I mean, there's humour in his others. I mean, particularly Full Metal Jacket is extremely funny. And his humour is particularly dark. It's a very black. It's like I say, it's a black comedy. So there's a pretty dark sense of humour, but there's no doubt it's funny. So I'm curious to see how funny this one is. Now, there's a load of people with skateboards going past. Do you remember this was the fence where I saw the Illuminati graffiti? Do you remember? Do you remember that video? I think they painted off. There was actually an Illuminati pyramid painted here. There's actually an alien along here. I'll show you the alien in a minute. Someone's painting an alien on the wall. But there was actually a Illuminati pyramid painted on this fence, and I made a video about it. I don't know if you remember. I did make a video about it. I think you tell me, you guys have got a better memory of the videos I make than I do. But anyway, there is an alien painted on the wall. I'll show you in a minute. So, I'm curious to see this film. Now, of course, 1964, it was the heart of the Cold War. It was just 2 years after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And it's interesting that people, when it comes to things that are very frightening, humour can be the best way of dealing with them. And for this situation, for Kubrick, who was essentially from the greatest generation, the pre-war generation, adult during World War II, in other words, and adult at the time when the World War II ended with these two terrible explosions at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then a couple of years later, finding out that the Soviet Union had developed its own atomic bomb. That's a terrifying situation. Now, it's one that suddenly they were faced with the fact that if another world war emerged, we'd destroy the world. That's how good we'd become at destruction. That's frightening. It's something that most of us, unless you're above a certain age, unless you're pretty old, will have kind of been born into. And we were born into this world, and we kind of grew up with this fear. But for the people who first experienced it, when it first emerged, it was a terrifying, absolutely terrifying experience. Anyway, here's the alien. Now that looks like a grey alien to me. And it says here, Detective Ruko, not detective, Detective Ruko. And there's another image there, I can't identify that, but there's this alien here. I always thought that's a rather strange thing to see. Anyway, so it must have been really frightening for people. Really, really terrifying. Just checking the time. I've got time to get there, I've got an hour to get there. And what you'll find is in those situations, finding a way to laugh at it is very, very healing. Humour is enormously healthy. It's an enormous way of diffusing horrific situations, and to be honest, for me it is essential. You know, I like to have a laugh. You know, I have a sense of humour. I even made a couple of comedy videos. So I've got some dirt on the lens. Just going to wipe the lens. It is absolutely, without a doubt, essential to my psychological well-being. And you'll find that the more horrific situations get, the more inclined people are to laugh at them. Now, this of course sometimes means making jokes that some might regard as very sick. Now, I've spoken before about doctors. You know, about how doctors have a very, very, To an outsider, it would seem a very offensive sense of humour. Like I told you about the notes, you know, to carry. Sometimes the doctors would write in patients' notes the word the acronym TF Bundy in someone who was very ill. And TF Bundy is actually an acronym. It means totally fucked, but unfortunately not dead yet. And they'd write that in someone who's really in a really bad way in intensive care. Now, you might say that's horrible, that's evil, that's nasty. And of course, if you ever went up to a patient's relative and said they were TF Bundy, they couldn't explain and said why, that would be, no doctor would do that. But amongst themselves, doctors and other healthcare professionals, and that includes me, as a hospital porter, I suppose we needed to relieve ourselves of the horrible nature of some of the things we had to do, and some of the things we had to deal with. People who were in a very bad way. They'd had injuries or illnesses which put them in a very bad situation, sometimes dead, sometimes dying. And you can't, if you do that and you don't find a way to laugh about it, you couldn't do it. You'd drive yourself nuts. You'd end up throwing yourself off a cliff. Oh look, it's a lovely VW Volkswagen. VW Volkswagen Dormobile. That's it. Oh, I love them old things. Aren't they great? You could live in one of those. So that's kind of why. That's what I mean when I say about humour, and I think you see that in some of these films. I mean, it's not the only funny film made about an intolerable situation. I mean, an earlier generation, a guy similar. I mean, he wrote a book called Catch-22, which is a book I read actually. I tried to read it. I couldn't get into it somehow. A lot of people recommended Catch-22 to me. It's a really great satirical comedy. I couldn't get into it. But then it's by a guy called Joseph Heller, and again, it's about a horrific situation. It's about war. This time about World War II. But it's a dark comedy written about a horrible situation. And you'll find every time something nasty happens, or there's some unpleasant thing happens in society, in the world, in history, you'll find people have written funny stories about it. You will find that inevitably. So it's a natural human instinct, in my view. So that's what I'm going to go and see. Right, and this lovely little place now. There's this University Sports Grounds, Bannister Close, Jackdaw Lane. Bannister Close, named after Sir Roger Bannister, the first man to run a mile in under 4 minutes on that sports ground over there. God, I'm like a tour guide. I should be on the open top buses, shouldn't I? Anyway, I've got to go to the cinema, which is in the city centre, and it's actually interesting. It's this. I remember saying my mother used to be a cinema usherette until she decided to get an education and improve her life, which she did. She got her education, she got her training. It allowed her to practice as a counsellor. I've told this story before, but whether that as for improvement, I'm afraid I don't consider that an improvement to her life. That's a long story, and I've told you before about the Tavistock Institute and things like that, and how it relates to that. But anyway, my mother was an usherette at the Phoenix Cinema, and it was great. I mean, a lot of the films I used to see, like Superman 2 and The Return of the Jedi and E.T. and all these other films that came out when I was a kid, and my mum worked there, I used to get in for free. I got in for nothing because my mum worked there. It's a great thing about having a relative who works at a cinema. Now so it's going to be a bit of a trip of nostalgia. I've not been back to the Phoenix Cinema since then, I think. Since all that time ago. As I said, I saw Dr. Strangelove when I was a kid, but I saw it on TV, obviously, because it came out long before I was born. So I've seen it on the big screen. And I'm also going to go and... So I'm not going to go and see it alone. I'm going to go and see it with a friend of mine. I'm going to meet up with him. He may be willing to appear on camera, actually, and share in this roving review of mine. And you know him. You probably, if you watch my stuff, you probably watch his stuff. He's called Mark Devlin. And he's written a book called Musical Truth, and he does a podcast called Musical Truth. And he's an interesting chap. He's very interested in a lot of the same subjects that I am, and produces material about them. You may have seen his YouTube channel as well, things like that. So he's very similar to me. And we were actually at AV10, the conference for that yesterday. Just went there for a book sale. We shared a stall, and he said, "I'm going to go see Dr. Strangelove tomorrow." And I sort of looked at me itinerary, and I said, "Well, I'll come and join you." So I only made the decision to go and see it yesterday. So that's where I'm heading now. So better go and get there. Got an hour to go. Okay, I'm nearly there now. It's funny now how memories are. I don't actually remember it like this. Unless it's the Mandela effect again. But I'm actually at the cinema now, and I've just Mark's arrived. He's phoned me. He's somewhere around here. And the Phoenix Picture House. The Phoenix Picture House. I think now that's a film I'll be doing a video of that. Tolkien. And there's several other films. Hey, hello, Mark. And so I'm at the cinema now. And there's Mark. Hi, Mark. Yeah, and Mark's you know Mark, don't you? Oh, we're outside the Phoenix Picture Palace here, as it's called now, and we're just seeing Doctor Strangelove. I'm with Mark Devlin, and what do you reckon of that?
Well, it was awesome. 55th anniversary reissue. So much truth in that movie. Absolutely biting satire on the madness and the absurdity of the Cold War and mutually assured destruction.
Yeah.
As relevant today as it was back then.
Yeah, it is.
From the master himself, of course.
Yeah, I've not seen, like I say, since I was a little kid. And I was really, I don't remember. I was very small when I saw it. It was on TV. But I mean, I was really quite, it wasn't what I expected. It was better than I expected, actually. Very, very funny to begin with. It's one of Kubrick's. It's shot in
very bleak, dark, sardonic humour.
Very much so.
Kind.
Absolute pitch black comedy at its very best.
Biting, devastating.
Yeah. The film is black and white. It's shot in a very dark sepia or dark monochrome. There's no coloration at all. Any of the scenes. There's no Wizard of Oz moment where everything turns coloured. It's all black and white.
That was a turning point in Kubrick's career as well. It was the last film shot in black and white. The next one he did after that was 2001, A Space Odyssey, which came with a huge budget and massive production. And he really stepped up his game and moved into the big league, it seems, with that next film. So this was a more gritty, raw piece of filmmaking, but absolutely striking, as we've said, in what it put across.
Yeah, it really is, yeah. I mean, it was low budget. I mean, the special effects, even from 1964, were very, very crude, very homespun. But I tell you what, it doesn't matter. You don't need that. I mean, as I've talked before at Blake 7, the series, and about how you don't need special effects, really, to tell a good story. You have everything else. Yeah. And, Peter Sellers, I think, was the guy. I knew him when I was a kid because he was in the Pink Panther films, which I love. Yeah. Really great comedies.
3 roles in that film, and there's elements of what he did in The Goons coming through there, because The Goon Show was a fairly recent thing when that film was released, and particularly the character of Dr. Strangelove, who I think is based on Henry Kissinger. That is my personal theory. He bears a very strong resemblance to Kissinger, even as he looked back in 1964. And of course he's portrayed as a German scientist, which brings in elements of Operation Paperclip and all these Nazi scientists that were brought over to the US under this covert plan. So I think the Dr. Strangelove character was very, very much based around what we heard about that, and with strong elements of Peter Sellers in The Goon Show and all the kind of comedy that he did through that.
Yeah, he's just a superb actor. I mean, he played. I was going to say he played 2 roles. He played the British Air Force officer, RAF officer,
and the US president as well.
He was the president. He was the
president with a fake bald head. Yeah.
I see. Right. I see. Because of course he was Dr. Strangelove himself. But he is such a great actor. He was a great actor.
Lots of little sneaky little clues in there, which which were a real treat for any conspiracy heads.
Yes.
So you've got the American Air Force Base captain that goes a little crazy and basically launches this all-out nuclear war. He's the one responsible for it when
General Ripper,
loses his mind.
There's some great names in
General Jack D. Ripper.
Jack D. Ripper.
Wonderful.
It's a wonderful naming. The naming of the characters is actually brilliant.
Yeah, he continually refers to how there's a communist conspiracy to subvert and poison our precious bodily fluids. And he talks about water and how he only drinks pure distilled or rainwater and grain alcohol. And he makes a specific reference to this plan to fluoridate the water as this outrageous sort of conspiratorial plot. And that, of course, is exactly what we've had for the past God knows how many decades. Reportedly, it was Edward Bernays, the famous propagandist, the father of public relations, who was very key in getting fluoride put into the drinking water in the United States, which would have been, prior to this movie being made. So that seems to be a reference to that. And Kubrick would appear to have been very much in the know as to how dangerous the fluoridation of water is when we take it into ourselves. And here we are, 55 years later, still doing it.
And exactly, there's plans to fluoridate almost everywhere now. What's interesting is that the so-called conspiracy theory to do with fluoride and the effect it has on the human brain and how it can use to forcibly medicate the population into submission was not actually one in popular culture in 1964.
That's right.
So
the best kept secret.
So once again, we have Stanley Kubrick appearing to insider knowledge of something before he normally would do through the normal channels.
Yeah, which very much speaks to his position within these circles to be privy to that kind of information, where the average Joe wasn't, as you say.
Yeah. Very odd. A very, very odd thing indeed. Yeah,
very revealing. And, so much of this now we can look back in hindsight with the benefit of being able to do this kind of research in this time, which people weren't able to in the 1960s, and we can see just how many clues and little indicators and pointers Kubrick encoded into his movies, and how few people back then would have picked up on what he was trying to communicate. It's only in these latter years that we can look back and understand the rich pickings that there are in those films.
Really, yeah, it's incredible. Well, I really hope they release some more of the Kubrick films for the big screen, some of the classic movies for the big screen. I really do. I'd love to see some more of them because, as I say, I think if you see them on the big screen, it's more meaningful than when you see them on TV.
A Clockwork Orange is on re-release this year, actually. You can catch showings of that on the big screen.
We got to go and see because that is it's very, very shocking. It's a controversial film, very violent, but it is about mind control, about using mind control to heal social ills, so to speak. So that's the next one we've got to go and see, I think.
And that would be a sly reference to MK Ultra, I would suggest.
Definitely.
That whole programme.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, so Mark, I'm sure the viewers, you already know Mark Devlin, because if you find me, you'll soon find Mark, but do you have a website or anything like that? You like people
Well, I do, yeah. markdevlin.co.uk is the link to all my stuff. I've got a YouTube channel as well, which is Mark Devlin TV. So just go to either of those, you'll find all my shows and all this crazy stuff that I get into as well.
You've written some books as well?
I have. I've written Musical Truth Volumes 1 and 2, and I'm writing a novel at the moment, actually, an allegorical novel, which is set in this very city of Oxford in 1990, 30 years ago, talking about how society was in those times, and with lots of spiritual truths encoded into the narrative of that book. I'm really enjoying that process.
Oh, great. Well, it'll be great to have you join me in this world of allegorical fiction writers.
Absolutely.
George Orwell.
Take some inspiration from you, man.
The spirit of the George Orwell, he'll be smiling on us. So thanks, Mark. Thanks for your input on this.
All right, man. Nice way to spend an afternoon.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. Well, thanks to Mark Devlin there for his input, and it's great to have someone else to do these reviews with and to actually talk about the various films I see. I've come to the University Parks here in Oxford, which is a wonderful place to come on a day like this, because the weather is actually very, very pleasant today for the time of year. And very often you'll see people playing cricket. There's some tennis. There's the cricket nets over there. There's actually a cricket field, and there's tennis and things like that here. It's a really, really lovely place. If you're in Oxford and it's nice weather, this is the place to come. University Parks. I thought I'd say a bit more about Dr. Strangelove, or how I learned to stop worrying and love the bomb. Yeah, it's Mark's. I knew Mark's insights would be very interesting. I mean, I spotted the connection to fluoride, which is really incredible when General Jack D. Ripper says that fluoride is involved. It's a plot. He says it was a communist plot starting in 1946. which is incredible, like I said, when that wasn't in a popular mindset at the time. So I can't remember if I recorded that because I had a private conversation with Mark as well. But the whole fluoride business, I mean, it's a plot. It's not a communist plot as such, although communism is also a part of the New World Order. The Cold War, I should point out, and I've done videos where I've gone into this in more detail. The Cold War was another of these all too common events in history where both sides are controlled by the same force. And I've done entire videos on this subject, and I won't remember to put links in the description box to those, I'm very sorry. But it's a plot, yeah, not necessarily by communists, but it's by the people who controlled Marxism and the Marxist movement in the same way they control capitalism and the capitalist movement, and funded these various sides in these wars and controlled them. So the very fact they even allude to fluoride in water in 1964 is incredible. And it's coming from the mouth of a madman. General Ripper is the insane. He's the commandant of a nuclear armed unit who goes mad, decides to launch his own preemptive strike. Now, it's again, it's a comedy from the start. You know it's funny, you know it's a big comedy. There's the incompetent aircrew, like I said, Slim Pickering is this hillbilly who's in command of this nuclear bomber, and his various crew members who are all sitting sort of slouched around in the airframe, just their helmets are put on lopsided, they're undone. You know, they look like something from MASH. And one of them's reading Playboy, another's playing card tricks at the beginning in the opening scene. It's just so classic. They're just a bunch of X-ray porters, basically. Sorry, X-ray porters, but it's true. They're a bunch of bloody X-ray porters flying a nuclear-armed combat aircraft, a B-52 bomber. And Slim Pickering, his character, goes, they pick up the message, we're going to go make war on them there Ruskies. And he puts on his cowboy hat. There's a wonderful scene, actually, so I think it's very familiar. It's the most played clip in the film, where they can't actually launch the bombs from the bomb bay. So he actually goes down, he actually does it manually, and in doing so he sits on top of the bombs. And when the bomb is dropped, he's riding on top of it, and he's whooping and waving his hat in the air like he's on a bucking bronco. It's hilarious slapstick comedy, that is. That's probably the most famous scene in the entire movie. One of the aircrew actually is James Earl Jones. You see a young James Earl Jones with this very, very familiar voice. Star Wars fans will know him as the voice of Darth Vader. Ufologists will know that he played Barney Hill in the original movie, which is called The UFO Incident, which is based on The Interrupted Journey. And of course there's been a new book by Stanton Friedman and Kathleen Marden all about the Betty and Barney Hill abduction. And I believe Bryce Zabel is working on a new movie about that, so it's very interesting to know. And he plays Barney Hill in that film, does it very well. So you have James Earl Jones as well. I suppose it's a parody of a Cold War thriller. I mean, it's very like one of these others. There's one, that's actually a film called By Dawn's Early Light, which is the last ever contemporary Cold War thriller involving nuclear exchange, which is kind of like a serious version of Dr. Strangelove. It's Dr. Strangelove without the laughs, basically, I describe it. And it's like it's a satire like that. Now, it's interesting that there's this character in it, an Air Force general. What's his name? I can't remember the name of the character. He's got a very funny name, like all the characters. He has a really amazing, really incredibly a name which makes you immediately chuckle. But he basically says that the whole, and this is, I think, the reason why the whole nuclear standoff situation is so unstable and dangerous. And it carries on today on a smaller scale. It carries on today. I mean, look at the way that there's all this the baiting of Russia in the modern world. And because we must remember that these superpowers from the Cold War, they've reduced their nuclear arsenal, but they still have enough to destroy the world. You actually, because of the nuclear arms race and multiple redundancy of their armaments, the US and Soviet Union have grossly overarmed themselves during the Cold War. They reduced those weapons since then, but the weapons they have are still sufficient to wipe out every man, woman and child on the earth, and much of the rest of the species as well. And look at the way we have a nuclear standoff. There still is a nuclear deterrent. I've done an article about this, but we have like a new generation of a submarine-based deterrent. They're replacing Trident. The Trident system is now getting old, so they're replacing it. We now have a post-war submarine-based nuclear missile deterrent system. It's in the middle of the Cold War. The propaganda that was going around at the time, you'd think that would be impossible. So it's what it is. It's the nuclear. Once the nuclear bomb was invented, you essentially had a situation where you had, once one country had it, if you were the enemy of that country, you had to get it as well. And once you got it, the other country had to get more of them, and then you had to get more of them, and more and more. And this is called mutually assured destruction, MAD, MAD, this notorious acronym. And you had to build more and more. You had to put some of them on submarines so that they couldn't be pre-targeted, so you wouldn't know where they were. Some of them you had to put on aircraft for the same reason. Things like that. And it turns out, actually, because they actually played a little featurette, a mini documentary before the main feature, where they interviewed one of Kubrick's daughters, they interviewed some of his family and other people. That Kubrick had done research into this, and Kubrick, like his collaborator Arthur C. Clarke, had a lot of contacts within the defence establishment. And he said that the scenario of the film, which is that a US Air Force commander actually loses his mind and decides to carry out his own nuclear strike against the Soviet Union, is a scenario that could happen because there is a policy that individual unit commanders did have the authority to use nuclear weapons in certain circumstances. That is, if there was a breakdown of communication with the National Command Authority, that is the President and his advisors. No doubt the Soviets had something similar, because it would mean that, supposing the President was killed in the first day of the war, someone just dropped a bomb on the White House and he was wiped out, but before they could evacuate him, or her, if it was Clinton, then the individual unit commanders did have the authority to fire back without orders from above. And so, even though there's a kind of disclaimer at the beginning of the film where you have this weird situation where they say the US Air Force, because there's this big disclaimer, probably because of some involvement with the Department of Defense in the production, that they say, this doesn't relate to anything we do, it doesn't relate to anything related to national defence policy, none of the people were based on real characters, etc., etc. But according to Kubrick, they were. So even though it's a comedy, there's some truth behind it, like all the best comedies. Now, what's interesting is that they're trying to phone up it's really funny actually, because they're trying to phone up the Russian president and the US president, who's played by Peter Sellers, and I didn't realise that. But he's like trying to phone up the Russian president, and it's quite a funny conversation, but it's clear what happened is that how do you respond? I mean, this is one of the awful logics, and there's this Air Force general is reading from a book which is calculating megadeaths. Now, megadeaths refers to 1 million dead people, so they talk about megadeaths as units in terms of the number of people who are killed. And so they're left with a dilemma, you see. And this general is advising him. Now, I read another book actually called Gold Crew, which is about this very scenario. If you have some maniac out there who's taken it into his own hands, like a senior military official, who's taken it into his own hands, has got through the screening process, the psychological screening process. It's quite funny actually, because it's quite amusing because there's a scene in the film where they're talking about the psychological screening process that let General Ripper put him in the position that he's in. What would happen is, of course, as soon as this one unit launches its strike against the Soviet Union will retaliate with full force and obliterate the United States, wipe it off the face of the map. Now, according to some military strategists, and I believe this was a real thing, it was in this book Gold Crew, and it's discussed also in Dr. Strangelove, is that in that scenario, in terms of game theory and the rational thing to do, the rational amoral response to that would be to carry out a preemptive strike against the Soviet Union and just wipe out as many of their own intercontinental ballistic missiles as you can before they get the chance to retaliate. Now, there's no way the US could come off unscathed. Some claim that in that situation the US could win that war. It'd be a winnable war with the Soviet Union completely destroyed and the US half destroyed. Believe me, there were people who were that desperate during the Cold War to consider that a likely option, a viable option. Indeed, in the book Gold Crew, I can't remember who the author is, but it's a book called Gold Crew. It's well worth watching, or it's well worth reading. It's about a Trident submarine, or Polaris submarine in the Cold War, an American one, where this politician who wants this scenario he infects the crew of the submarine with a drug which makes them go crazy and makes them go mad. They put it in the paint. He puts it in the paint. He has the submarine painted before it goes to sea, and the crew, and it includes a chemical which gives off vapour or gas which drives the crew mad. And so they're about to launch their missiles against the Soviet Union. And this particular politician, Caleb Warden his name is, I remember that character very well, he advises the president to carry out a preemptive strike against the Soviet Union, because in that scenario that would be the only rational thing to do. And that's how unstable the situation was. It's like someone said once during the Cuban Missile Crisis there was a situation where the outcome depended on a flip of a coin. Heads we all die, tails we all live. It came down tails, so we lived to tell the tale, and I'm here now to talk about it, and you're here now to listen to it. No one would otherwise. My goodness me. Is that insane or what? I just only hope, that the Captain Salas situation prevailed in that situation, and the aliens would step in and stop it. That's the only thing I'd hope for. But it's a very weird, very dark situation. I mean, Adam Curtis did this documentary called The Trap. And now I'm a big fan of that Adam Curtis. He first came to prominence to me with the film The Power of Nightmares, about the war on terror and the post 9/11 world. But he's done many other excellent documentaries. The best one by far is The Trap. Whatever happened to our dreams of freedom? And in one situation they actually talk about this. They talk about game theory, and they talk about things like the prisoner's dilemma and other types of these very sadistic kind of games, these very sadistic kind of moral equations that the people involved in the study group, the Rand Corporation of all places, yes, that equivalent of the Tavistock Institute in the United States, were involved in. I don't know if you ever saw The Beautiful Mind about John Nash. He was one of these people. John Nash, he was one of these people involved in this game theory. And it had this very dark vision of people as basically as a bunch of psychopaths, really. I mean, there's one game they played which is literally, and I quote the title of the game, the name of the game, it's "Fuck you, buddy." they had to ask these questions, and I think this is where this idea came from. But anyway, that's what the president actually turns down. He says, I don't want to go down in history as the world's greatest mass murderer. And the general is saying, look, if you don't do this, we're all going to be destroyed anyway. My God. You can see why it drove people to the point where you have to make sick jokes about it, for the reasons I explained earlier in the film. And there's a lot of other there's a lot of very funny elements to the game, to the film. For example, there's a lot of Orwellian stuff in it, actually. And so that's why I love Kubrick so much. There's a lot of very Orwellian things in it. It reminded me a little bit of Eyes Wide Shut. For example, I'm just going to adjust the viewfinder. There's this on the military base, the air base, which General Ripper is actually commanding, is it has a. By the way, I've come down this nice little spot here in the University Park, Mesopotamia again. Just to let you know, the base has a motto, and it's on all the signboards everywhere. It's "Peace is our profession." And this is even when there's like a. It's really funny because there's like the security police at the base, the sort of thing that Larry Warren used to do. They're trying to defend the base from these attackers, and they think they're Soviet, but they're actually Americans who've come to try and recapture the base from the rogue general. And they're saying, God, where did the Soviets get hold of those American trucks and weapons? They're actually Americans they're fighting. But they're having this big shootout, and it's so funny. It's just such a laugh, because they're having this big shootout, and there's this big billboard above the buildings, and it says, "Peace is our profession." Honestly, man, Orwell couldn't make that up himself. Oh God, it's so funny. It really is. That's a lovely little site, isn't it? If you want a sort of Slaxer-esque view of Oxford, that's the place to go. There's all sorts of other things. There's like there's a is the big board. That's funny. The big board is, they have this sort of like map above this conference table, this circular conference table. It's like the war room, and they have this big circular conference table. It's like the Knights of the Round Table. And you've seen the thing in Project Blue Book. I talked about Project Blue Book and about the big round table the Majestic 12 have. It's like that. It's bigger though. And there's this map above it called the Big Board. And the Air Force General, he says, you can't bring the Soviet ambassador in here, he's going to see the big board. What's interesting is there are maps on the board which are distorted. It's almost like a child's drawing. And you see the outline of North America, the outline of the Soviet Union. It's strange how this is a distorted view. And I find that very unusual. It's like like I say, it's like a child's drawing. And now, Dr. Strangelove is actually a person, he's a character. Again, played by Peter Sellers. And what Mark said is very interesting, and I do agree actually, that it could be a reference to Henry Kissinger. Now, the background of Henry Kissinger is very strange, but he wasn't famous in those days. I mean, he became US Secretary of State under President Nixon. The time the film was made, the US President was Johnson. Kennedy's successor, who only got into the presidency because Kennedy was shot. This film came out, as I say, a few months after the Kennedy assassination, which would have been it was November '63. This was May '64. This film was released, which meant it was in production during the Kennedy assassination. It would have to have been, based on how long it takes to make films. This guy is I don't know what Kissinger was doing in '64. I don't know, but Kissinger is German, obviously, and there's a bit of a dark background to where he came from. Of course, he says he's a Holocaust survivor, he escaped from the camps. George Soros says that as well. It's the usual story. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. There's no proof of that at all. But that's a very Oxford-like scene, isn't it? Going on the river in a punt. If you ever come to Oxford, you've got to do that. Anyway, This guy, Dr. Strangelove, is different from Kissinger. He's got the same hairstyle though, and he looks like Kissinger. He's played by Peter Sellers. Again, Peter Sellers plays this role as well. And he goes back to his best, which is comedy, and Sellers was a great actor. And comedy is his forte. As I said, I love the Pink Panther films where he plays Inspector Clouseau. I'm a huge fan of those films. They make myself laugh myself silly with them. He's this guy who's German. He's in a wheelchair, although, funnily enough, in the last scene he stands up and walks. And he says, "Oh, can I walk? I can walk." He has this wheedling voice. Funnily enough, Henry Kissinger is very famous because he has this very deep, gruff voice like this German accent. He talks like this. This is Henry Kissinger. And Kissinger's still alive, of course. Only the good die young, as Billy Joel said. But in the film, this Dr. Strangelove has this German accent, but he has this really high-pitched, wheedling, effeminate voice. He's like that. And I don't know if that was maybe having the opposite voice to Kissinger could be a way of disguising who it was meant to satire. Because there were probably lines over which even Kubrick wouldn't dare cross. In my view, that's a perfect possibility. So he's this guy, he's this mad scientist in a wheelchair. And as Mark was saying, this is a very obvious reference to Operation Paperclip and the acquisition of scientists from Nazi Germany. It's indeed both sides in the Cold War had. And that's a story for another time, but there's no doubt about that happening. He's this guy in a wheelchair, and he has this, what looks to his right arm is very strange. It's like, I can't think, it's like a robotic arm or something. And it has his big black glove. And he has trouble, he's not very dexterous with it. He's trying to hold a cigarette with it, and it keeps doing weird things. At one point, this robotic arm, I think it is a robotic arm, it tries to strangle him. It grips its owner by the throat and tries to strangle him. And he keeps losing control of his right arm, and he keeps doing Nazi salutes. He keeps doing the old Roman salute. And whenever that happens, Strangelove has to grab the arm with his other arm, his left arm, which looks like a normal arm, and pull it down. And he's continuously doing this. He's continually trying to manipulate his right arm with his left in various ways. And very often, because several times it does these Nazi salutes. And what's more, Strangelove refers to the president as Mein Führer. It's definitely a reference to Operation Paperclip, absolutely. He's very funny. He talks about this doomsday device that the Russians have, and it turns out the Americans have a doomsday device too, but they didn't. This is a bomb which ends, it's like the bomb to end all bombs, which will poison the entire earth with fallout and stuff like that. And it turns out it can't be diffused, it goes off if it's diffused and things like that. And turns out the Americans have one as well, and he says we don't want a doomsday gap. You know about the idea of the nuclear arms gap. It's a satire on the nuclear arms gap. And then when it seems like the end of the world is inevitable, they're talking about going down into the mines. He said putting people down in mines in these underground bases, which I believe they do. The elite have these mines, and they say we don't want a mine gap. It's like they keep having these ideas about gaps between the two sides. The end of the film is very strange, actually. It doesn't really have a conclusion. It didn't feel like it felt like it wasn't the end. In the final scene, is the bomb. Firstly, they've dropped the one rogue aircraft, the one aircraft that's actually, because eventually Ripper is stopped, and there's this one rogue aircraft, and the one rogue aircraft continues to its target and drops the bombs because the commander, Slim Pickering's character, is sitting on top of it as it goes down, as I'm explaining. And you find, well, what happens next? And they're just talking about going down into mines, and they're talking about how they have to have 10 women for every man, so that they can have a harem and stuff like that, and try and encourage them to go. And then you see Strangelove get out of his wheelchair and walk, and the film ends. It feels like that's not the end. There's no real conclusion to the story. It is like the film cuts off halfway, or not necessarily halfway, but before the ending. It's like the ending is it's truncated. The ending is gone. And I'm like, wow. It's very strange. You see the... I mean, Kubrick is famous for his short titles, for his short title sequences. He doesn't have these long drawn-out credit rolls like some films do. And so what happens is the Strangelove gets up and starts walking. Goes, oh my goodness me, I can walk! And then the film immediately cuts to a sequence of nuclear bomb tests, films of nuclear bomb tests, which I've seen. You can get them on YouTube. There's a YouTube channel called Nuke Test, which shows the films of all the various nuclear bomb tests. And I've watched them, and they're quite chilling to examine, actually, quite frankly. They're very, very... But yeah, I've watched them, these films of various nuke tests. And while you're watching this series of clips, you hear Vera Lynn's song "We'll Meet Again." We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, etc. And then it cuts to the final title shot, which just says the end and gives a couple of credits. That's it. So a very strange ending to the film. Feels like it didn't really end properly. Generally speaking, it's a really, really good film. And it's extremely, very Kubrick. Very typical of Stoner Man. You can see his style in it, exactly like his more recent films. Exactly like some, again, let's say in his earlier films, I think this may have been the first film where he came into his own, although I've never seen Lolita, which was a film he made 2 years earlier, in '62. His film before that was Spartacus, which was a good film, but I don't think he really came into his own with that movie. In the sense, if I'd watched that and didn't know it, I wouldn't know that was a Kubrick film. I'd have said it was Cecil B. DeMille or one of these other great sort of sand and sandals and sword, sand and sandals kind of epics from the 1950s. I'd have said it was one of them. So Spartacus is not... It's a film directed by Stanley Kubrick. It's not really a Kubrick film in terms of its style. Dr. Strangelove most definitely is. Most definitely is. And like I said, I've never seen Lolita. That's got Peter Sellers in as well. Never seen Lolita. Like all of Kubrick's films that he made from about 60 whatever, early 60s onwards, the film is made at Shepperton Studios. It's made in England. Kubrick's living in England by then. He hardly ever leaves the country. I don't think whether he even leaves it at all from that moment onwards till the day he died. All his great movies were made at Pinewood and Shepperton. So, all in all, a very interesting film, a very funny, a dark satire to it, a black comedy. Glad I saw it. Glad I saw it on the big screen. Had a chance to do that, and I'll report back to my dad, who's a big fan of the film, that I'm a fan of it as well now. So he'll be very pleased about that, I'm sure.
Now, as often happens in these little movie reviews, sometimes ideas occurred to me after principal production has been shot, and in this case I'm inserting a little extra scene here just to tell you a little bit more about what I feel about this film. Now, first of all, the title sequence. The title sequence is very strange indeed. As I said, the title words, the title text is very, very strange, like simplistic, almost childlike writing font on the titles. As you'll see, it's really strange, almost postmodern art or childlike, almost like Dadaism or something, which matches very much with the map that was drawn on the big board, the maps I talked about earlier, the outlines of the North America and the Soviet Union, which are some very, very, again, very crudely drawn. They're crude drawings. It's kind of like something a little kid would do. In the title sequence of Dr. Strangelove, you see a film of an aircraft being refueled in mid-air. This mid-air refueling scene, which is quite a common it's a common thing done. I think this is a B-52 bomber actually, and it's been it's mating with this tanker aircraft. Now, the terminology they use is mating, and it is very odd. It does have a slightly sexual connotation to it, even though it's not really a sexual film. I mean, unlike a lot of other Kubrick's films, there's very little in the way of sex. There's a humorous element where the woman who's supposed to be the Air Force General's secretary who's actually his like mistress, is there wearing her underwear, and she answers the phone for him and things like that. There's no other female characters there actually. All the other cast are male, and yet this have this strange connotation, I think, and that the tune that is played in the background during the title sequence is "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas," which I think is extremely odd. Very odd indeed. So, rather, you should expect this from Kubrick, actually. Some rather strange imagery within the title shots, which it's not altogether certain about what they actually mean. It's not altogether certain exactly what's it all about. Of course, it is a military aircraft. It's in mid-air refueling. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. It's simply it sets the scene for this is a US Air Force aircraft being refueled in mid-air. And of course, that is what the film is about. So maybe I'm just reading too much into it. But a little Christmas song playing in the background, or tune crooning away in the background, is unusual. It's an unusual choice of score and imagery that's for this particular movie. Now, something else I want to mention, which is actually something that Mark brought to my attention, not myself. I can't take credit for this. I didn't notice it. But throughout every scene on the aircraft, that is on the Air Force bomber, where the Slim Pickering is actually the commander, as I explained, and James L. Jones is there too. Every single one of these scenes has the same tune in the score, and the tune is when Johnny Comes Marching Home. Now, this is actually a tune. It goes with a military beat. There's a military drum and a flute playing, which again fits in with the theme. It is a military aircraft. They're in a bomb attack mode, so that is actually a fitting symbol, you might say, for the theme of the scene itself. That being said, however, when Johnny Comes Marching Home is better known by other lyrics. It's been transformed with new lyrics into what I suppose you would say is a children's song, which is "The Animals Went in 2 by 2." So instead of "When Johnny Comes Marching Home Again, Hurrah, Hurrah," it's "The Animals Went in 2 by 2, Hurrah, Hurrah." The hippopotamus and the kangaroo, and they all went marching all to get out of the rain. It's that tune is in every single scene when the aircraft is in flight, apart from the very beginning before they have the alert. Every single scene is accompanied by that score, which is interesting, and especially in light of the new lyrics. And Mark mentioned this that what you actually have is this issue of Noah's Ark. Now, what is Noah's Ark? Noah's Ark is a story about a global disaster from which some chosen people escape by going into a ship which floats above this rising tide of water, which destroys the rest of the world. Isn't it odd that it's a metaphor, perhaps, for the way the elite plan to hide in their own form of ark? It could be an underground base, it could be a spaceship, it could be a base on the moon, it could be any of these things. They plan to hide away from the rest of the world while the rest of the world is destroyed by disaster, whether natural or man-made, a nuclear war or a volcano or meteoric strike or something like that. And that is again a current theme of these disaster movies, and indeed this is essentially discussed within the film. They talk about going down into mines. What are these underground bases? And they talk about, we could have sun lamps and greenhouses for the plants, we could breed animals for food and things like that, and well, all you guys would be great because we'll have 10 women for every man and things like this. It is Noah's Ark, isn't it? And so, as Mark Devlin pointed out to me when we were off camera, it's interesting they use that song, isn't it? It could be simply because it is a military march from the Civil War, yes, but with the lyrics about Noah's Ark, it fits in very well with the general theme of the film. And perhaps it's saying something about what the elite do plan to do in the event of a nuclear war or other form of global disaster. And here is Dr. Strangelove himself, played by Peter Sellers. Now, it's funny, he's like there's another really sort of like darkly funny thing that he does, when they're talking about how many people are going to be killed in a nuclear bomb, he pulls this thing out from under his jacket, which is like a it's like some kind of gauge. It's like one of these cardboard calculator things, and he moves some of the little tabs on each side until he says, we have 300 million dead, but if I do this it is 30 million dead, and things like that. He's rather like that. he's that kind of character, kind of anti-hero type person. Very funny indeed. What's interesting about this film, there's another thing I just looked up, I thought I'd mention. I looked it up on Wikipedia, of course, in-depth research. I was saying that the film had to have been in production at the time of the Kennedy assassination, seeing as it was released in May of 1964. Now this is interesting. It says here that the first test screening film was actually scheduled for November the 22nd, 1963. So it was actually finished by then. It was scheduled for a test screening. So they'd bring a test audience in to see what they thought of it. And the film was just weeks away from its scheduled premiere, but because of the assassination, the release was delayed until late January 1964. Alright. So it wasn't May 64, it was January, so it actually came out earlier than I thought. So because it's May 1919, so it's May 2019 now, it's not the exact 55th anniversary to the month, but to the year. But what's interesting, they changed the script slightly because the aircraft captain, played by Slim Pickering, actually says in one of his lines, he talks about the survival kit that these people have, which includes some money, American money, and other things to trade with Russian peasants and things like that. And he says, a fella could have a pretty good weekend in Big D with all that stuff. A Big D, for people in Texas, means Dallas, the city of Dallas. Now that was changed to Vegas. Now the version I saw, he said Vegas, as in Las Vegas. And the reason was they didn't want to say, because one of the things they had in their survival kit was a gun. And they carried a little pistol in their survival kit. Now of course they don't want that. They don't want any references to guns and Dallas in the same scene. This is just 2 months after the Kennedy assassination. This was actually, it's very interesting. Apparently there was a scene that was cut as well where they have like a custard pie fight, and the President Muffley, played by Peter Sellers, he actually they have a fight, and General Turgison, who's the Air Force general, whose name I couldn't remember, says, "Gentlemen, our gallant young President has been struck down in his prime." Well, it's pretty obvious they wouldn't want that, would they? It's interesting actually that these things were so affected. Like a lot of things were affected by the Kennedy assassination. For instance, the film The Manchurian Candidate was due to be released also in November of 1963, but that was delayed until quite late the following year. They wanted a lot of time between that film coming out and they wanted the Kennedy assassination to sort of go out of the news cycle a little bit. It's interesting that if you watch The Manchurian Candidate, what's it about? It's about a mind control assassin who's tasked with the job of assassinating a presidential candidate. I wonder why they delayed it so much.
Right, so much more videos to come. And thank you very much, all of you, for watching. Hospital Porters, Pride and Dignity, stop the New World Order.